This week on Life and Faith.
People are rejecting their own self-interest because they're worried it might also help the other side. And so they'll choose to harm themselves if it might mean that they could perform or enact some kind of antagonism against those that they disagree with politically.
People that don't forgive themselves tend to harm themselves.
So the sun would set at the end of May and not come back to mid-August.
Actually, what if it's the most boring thing in the world?
No one comes out of history with clean hands. It's a very messy process.
Welcome to Life and Faith from CPX. I'm Simon Smart. Well, this year, there are many major elections around the world. There's over 60 countries involved. It's a global record, apparently, and over 2 billion people will vote. And a very notable one, of course, is the US. And this event is of such global significance, we are going to be spending 2 episodes on it here at Life and Faith. And the backdrop to the discussions we'll be having is the highly polarised environment in which people's political views are held and expressed with religious zeal, often with divisive and ugly results. What can be done about that? How can civic and political life be conducted in a way that serves the common good and respects and makes room for different perspectives? Do we even aim for that at all anymore? There's also a lot of talk around the role that people of faith may play in the outcome of particularly the US election. This week, we will hear from Michael Wear, the founder of the Center for Christianity and Public Life in the US. He worked in the Obama White House. Next time, it will be Darrell Bock, Professor of New Testament at Dallas Theological Seminary, who also has some interesting and perceptive things to say about the landscape he is navigating. So we'll have a political insider from the north and a biblical scholar from the south. Should be interesting. First up in this episode, Michael Wear. Michael has been on Life and Faith before. His latest book is The Spirit of Our Politics, Spiritual Formation and the Renovation of Public Life, where he makes the case for the spiritual health and civic character of individuals as the key to improving the state of our politics and public affairs. In this sense, his is a hopeful take on what can be achieved in what can sometimes look like a quagmire of political opposition and enmity. What might sound less hopeful is his description of the challenge of modern politics in his country as being more like leukemia than appendicitis. I asked him to expand on that a bit.
What I'm trying to do at the outset of the book is dislodge this idea that's promoted in our politics, that if we just got rid of certain actors, if we just took on an enemy and eliminated them, that's the only thing preventing our politics from functioning just perfectly. I am seeking to press readers to consider that the problem is far more systemic than that. Now, I want to say, with some of our talk about systems and structures, sometimes we view systemic problems as problems that are removed from the will of the people. What I want to say about our politics is actually it's intimately tied to the will of the people. It's intimately tied to the kind of people we are. In democratic societies, if you're going to focus on the systemic, you have to focus on the personal. You have to focus on the people who make up the democracy. And I argue in the book that that is both the beauty and weakness of democracy, that democracies can't get around the kind of people we are.
Yes, and that image of what we're facing here is leukemia is a pretty stark one and probably speaks to the helplessness that a lot of people of goodwill feel in the face of this very real challenge.
Yes, I do think there's a fair amount of helplessness, exhaustion, a sense that the wheels sort of keep on turning regardless of what we do. I think with this book, I want to encourage people to take responsibility for what they have responsibility over and not to sort of resort to apathy or extremism because they don't have final say over everything that happens or even most things. We need to take responsibility over what we're contributing to our politics. What happens when politics is in the room with us? That's what we have first say over. Now, I've spent my life working on public policy issues. I believe in advocacy. I believe in the power of legislation and public policy instruments. I continue to work on those things. But what I've come to is this sense that even if you have the right policy change in mind, it takes a certain kind of people to enact those changes. You need to be and have the kind of people who would desire a healthier politics. And I'm not sure that we have that en masse to the extent that we need to at this point. And that's part of what we need to build toward.
Now, you make the point that political parties have become brands themselves,
Yes.
and in a sense, markers of identity. This is very problematic, it seems to me.
Yes, it is. Let me put it this way. We belong to a political party because we believe things. We should not believe things because we belong to a political party.
Yeah.
Political parties at their best, and their real purpose is to mediate political difference, not just between the parties, but actually within them. That's their primary purpose. And because it's their primary purpose, often those who are in charge of those political parties, those who are involved in the actual machinery of the political party, it's much easier for them if the general population and the general sort of party membership, instead of viewing the party as a vehicle for mediation, views the political party, as you said, as a sort of brand, as a sort of top-down, sort of the party sets the agenda and then everybody else follows. Of course, that sort of hides the ball. The party is its members. The members are the party. So parties should not be viewed at the individual level. Your party membership does not require you to sign over your conscience to every jot and tittle of the party platform. You're actually there to influence the party platform. And so this is a key shift that I think has to be made for the good of our politics, and I'd argue for the good of our political parties. I remember I was speaking at a college, and the local political party learned that I was going to be in town. And so they invited me to speak to their local party meeting. Now, the issue was I was speaking at the college about just this thing, about how parties should actually be subject to disagreement and ought to mediate disagreement, not squelch it. And so I didn't want to write another talk. And so I went to the local political party and gave essentially the same talk I was giving at the college. And I expected I'd get kicked out, and that's fine. You know, I'm not really too interested in running the local county party that I was in. So I wasn't too worried about it. I finished my talk, and the vice chair of the party raises their hand. And I thought, well, this is it. It's over. I'll be run out of here. You know, I'll get my getaway car. And instead, the vice chair of the local party goes, I'm sorry, could you go back to what you were saying about how we could influence the national party? And we went on to have a 45-minute conversation about all of the areas of public policy where the national party, the folks in the local party felt the national party was working against the interests of members of that party in that locality. It was an agricultural district. Well, the national party doesn't have the same concentration of agricultural interests as in this local county. And so it was really an encouraging conversation. And I'd love to see that across the country, not just in the setting of political parties, but just people, again, taking responsibility for the responsibility that they have and stewarding the limited influence that they have, more than they are worried about the influence that they do not have.
Yeah, and gives them a sense of purpose in what they're doing.
Yes.
They might actually be able to
Yes.
influence something for change. Now, you are very interested in recovering something that's been lost in politics. Can we talk for a moment about the particular character of polarisation that we are experiencing today? Because it is of a very different feel to just strong disagreement.
It is. In the book, I talk about quite a bit this framework for thinking about the kind of polarization we have. And this framework was offered by a number of social scientists in 2020. And they said the particular kind of polarization we have today is, they referred to it as political sectarianism. And political sectarianism is a toxic cocktail of three ingredients: aversion, which is the tendency to dislike and distrust opposing partisans, the tendency of othering, which is the tendency to place opposing partisans outside of the boundaries of sort of normal human community, and then the tendency of moralization, or I refer to it as misplaced moralization, which is the tendency to elevate political disagreement to the level of, the social scientists use the term iniquity, to raise the level of political disagreement to pure fights of good and evil, to that of dogma. And this toxic cocktail has sort of churned to the extent that the social scientists say out-party hate has become a stronger motivator than in-party love in voting decisions.
Yeah.
In other words, I think we often talk about, can we move beyond self-interest to a conception of the common good? And I support that. I think what we need to face is that for so many, self-interest would be a higher aspiration than where we are now, which is that people are rejecting their own self-interest because they're worried it might also help the other side. And so they'll choose to harm themselves if it might mean that they could perform or enact some kind of antagonism against those that they disagree with politically.
All right, so there's a few steps before we even get to self-interest here. So
I think so.
yeah. Now, you describe a study from More in Common. They're people we've done a bit of work with before as well. And it shows that the most engaged and ideological tribes in American political spectrum, they're the devoted conservatives and the progressive activists, have an outsized influence on politics. So the thought here is that they make up about 14% of American public,
Yes.
which means there's a heck of a lot of other people who could theoretically have the sort of influence that you're sort of driving towards. Is that what keeps you going? And there's this group, very large group.
Yeah. So that 14% is heavily constituted, I believe, of what the political scientist Eitan Hirsch refers to as political hobbyists. Now, a political hobbyist is someone who, if you ask them if they were burnt out from politics, they'd say, oh, yeah, I'm so burnt out from politics. If you ask them, so what campaign are you involved with? How many doors have you knocked on this week? How many letters have you written? They'd say, no, I don't do any of that, but I did spend 6 hours on Reddit today, and I watch cable news for 5 hours a day. Political hobbyists are people who both consume and produce a lot of political entertainment, sort of a lot of political culture, but they never actually contribute to power building. They never actually take part in our political process. And this is, obviously problematic. You have fringes that are defining for everybody else the culture in which our politics operates. And I've talked to United States senators, I've talked to members of parliament in UK. I think it's important to take seriously not just sort of how our elected officials, how the norms that they set affect the population's expectation for our politics, but how hemmed in, boxed in our politicians feel by the expectations of hatred, the expectations of anger, the expectations of fear that we place on our politicians. And this 14% is a huge part of it. Now, this More in Common study also talks about what they call the exhausted majority. And I think that's a very interesting, compelling concept. I think there are some who are a bit more optimistic about what the exhausted majority could bring to our politics, or at least sort of, there are some people who have said, well, we just need to get the exhausted majority engaged. And what I have suggested and what concerns me is I think a lot of the 14% were formerly exhausted, and then they got motivated by an issue that really struck a nerve with them. And instead of going to a more healthier spot, they went from total apathy and withdrawal into a harmful mode of engagement. And so I'm not sure that the exhaustive majority holds the key for us. I think we need to think about what does it look like to move the exhaustive majority into a healthier form of engagement, but I don't think it naturally goes there.
Now, I want to talk to you about Christianity in public, because that has a real influence in your politics. And you mentioned in the book that too often Christianity is viewed there as either useless or something to be used.
Yeah.
You would have issues with both of those perspectives.
I would. I think that there is a, well, first I'll say, right, we want people to find value in the resources that Christianity has to offer as they can and as they will. If someone advances human rights, for instance, but isn't a Christian and would even say that they reject the influence of Christianity in politics, I don't want them to stop advocating for human rights, even though if you agree with Nick Walterstorff, the architecture around the idea of human rights is closely tied, and Walterstorff would say is sort of inextricable from the development of Christianity. And so we want to partner with people who are not Christians. We want people to find value where they could find value. I will say that I find misuse of Christianity both by those that deny the reality of Christianity and those who consider themselves great defenders of the faith. Mm-hmm. I think politics has a lot of dangers for people who view in Christianity a sort of toolbox for advancing their political aspirations and their political ideas. And that's something to be wary about. We don't want to use Christianity as much as we want God to use us in ways that are for the flourishing of society.
Part of this problem that you identify is that people have been, in a sense, going to church to get their political views affirmed. And that's hugely problematic.
It is. In America in the 1990s, there was a seeker-sensitive church movement, which basically meant that the church organized itself around the idea of appealing to, attracting to, and bringing in people who were not yet committed to the faith, but were sort of exploring it, were interested, could be interested. I argue in the book that we have seen now the rise of politics-sensitive churches, churches that are organizing themselves, making decisions around either attracting people of a certain political persuasion or actively seeking to repel people of a certain political persuasion. This is deeply harmful to the witness of the church because it suggests that what is at the center of the church is not Jesus Christ, but a particular set of political opinions. And when we dislodge Jesus from the center, that is never going to be an edifying or faithful sort of endeavor. And I think that there have been profound consequences of this sort of overconfidence in our political opinions.
You're listening to Life and Faith, and I'm speaking with Michael Ware, author of The Spirit of Our Politics. In his book, he writes about something he calls the fixer gospel, which he says is not uncommon in the church and is seriously problematic. So what is the fixer gospel?
The fixer gospel is drawing on the ideas of a philosopher and teacher by the name of Dallas Willard. And he wrote about this idea of gospels of sin management. And the fixer gospel is my name for one of them. And essentially, the fixer gospel refers to, I take it from this common character and this trope in gangster movies. There is this character of the fixer. And with some exceptions, the fixer is usually not the main character, usually only appears for a scene. And it's when the protagonist has a problem that the protagonist needs to have solved. So
usually involves a lot of blood and guts.
Usually involves a dead body in the kitchen or something. And the fixer comes in. These movies almost always have a scene where the fixer is on the phone. Usually you never see the fixer's face. And the main character says, I have a problem. I need you to fix it. I don't care how you get it done. I don't want to know how you get it done. Just take care of it. And I never want to hear from you again. And this is essentially the fixer gospel. We have a sin problem. Jesus knows how to take care of it. There's a transaction that can take place. And then it's not really essential if you hear from Jesus or if Jesus hears from you again after the transaction has been made. You can sort of go on and live your life knowing that your problem has been taken care of. And of course, Simon, that is not the gospel that Jesus offers. That's not the kind of eternal life he was talking about.
How would you describe, or how would you define perhaps, the term Christian nationalism? And what's its role been in all of this?
Simon, I believe that the kinds of things that people who are familiar with the term, the kinds of things that they think about when they think of Christian nationalism exist. And I think that it can be a helpful academic paradigm for understanding certain aspects of events. I'm not sure how helpful the term is in our politics or in terms of persuading anybody, or really in terms of at the general level, really getting a handle on what's going on. And so Christian nationalism has been used to refer to everything from Christian imagery that appeared on the Capitol grounds on January 6th of 2021 to the idea that the Bible should inform voting decisions, to the idea that our rights come from God and not from government. That's a pretty broad swath of views. And some of those views, depending on the poll, are held by some 85% of Americans, depending on how it's phrased. And I worry that nothing has done more to provide energy and momentum to the Christian nationalist movement, quote unquote, than the anti-Christian nationalist conversation. So even very recent polling shows 3 to 5% of Americans know what the term is. And so I think it's, here's what I would say. For whatever we call it, and I prefer the term political therapeutic deism, for this leveraging of Christian symbols, imagery, rhetoric, in order to supplement and provide sort of divine affirmation for one's political views. That is a destructive thing. It can be a destructive thing to our politics. I think it is certainly a destructive thing to our souls, and that needs to be addressed. As a strategic matter, I don't want to cede to people, for instance, who would go into a church and say, look, I know Jesus has this teaching about loving your enemies, but if you do that in politics, you'll get run over. And so, vote for me and I'll take care of your enemies for you. That's an explicit rejection of Jesus's teachings. I don't know why I would call that Christian nationalism. Why would I cede the term Christian to something that advances itself in such overtly unchristian arguments? And so I think that the conversation attends to important issues. I think we need to do some work in how the conversation is carried out publicly.
Yeah, that's really interesting, very helpful. You don't even want to kind of give away the term in a sense or attach the Christian.
Well, they would like nothing more than to have the banner of Christian anything. And so, I'm not willing to cede that to them. Yeah.
Can you comment on the way that someone's Christian faith ought to, at various points, be actually a huge challenge to their politics, no matter what their politics is?
Yeah, sure. Well, so C.S. Lewis wrote, and I'm paraphrasing, of course, but he wrote that the great temptation when we combine faith and politics is to proclaim God hath said when he hasn't spoken, to sort of mistake our political opinions because of our identity as Christians, to therefore conflate our political opinions with the Christian opinion or approach to those issues. He said it was using God's name in vain, a sort of violation of the third commandment. Politics is penultimate. Christianity has a claim about ultimate reality. that of course influences the penultimate, but the penultimate is not the ultimate. Christianity offers dogma, like ultimate truth about reality. Politics is about the prudential and the proximate. Politics is the area of the contingent and the mediated. Politics is rarely where you go to express your pure, unmediated will. Politics is completely mediated. It is about self-governance inherently as a diverse community. And so this means that our faith is going to challenge the systems, the structures, the programs that we put together in order to somehow sort of advance the ideal, our good. I think just one more thing on this, Simon, which is the Christian faith offers ideas and resources which are a challenge to human ideology. And so whenever you think that you've sort of got the range of human concern cornered, like the market cornered, the Christian faith points outside of the lines that you've drawn and says, what about this?
Yeah.
What about this point of human dignity? What about where this injustice is happening? And so we're always challenged by a concern that is so often greater than what our politics can muster and what we would naturally sort of muster and attend to.
In light of that, I wonder what you imagine the Christian contribution could be to rebuilding social trust that has been so eroded.
There are so many ways in which I think the Christian faith, Christian tradition, Christian history provides resources that can direct decision-making and inform decision-making. And I believe that. I will say I've become convinced that in this moment, perhaps the greatest contribution that Christianity has to offer is not in telling our politics what it is or what it must be, but in reminding our politics what it is not, in right-sizing the role of politics in our lives and in our imagination. Politics is causing spiritual harm right now. And a big reason for that is many are going to politics to get their spiritual needs met. There are obviously a lot of problems with this. One of them is that if we're going to politics as a sort of reservoir for our loves, our aspirations, our hopes, our antagonisms, that really crowds out the limited but essential purpose of going to politics to advance justice and affirm human dignity, to go to politics in an other-centered way, to pursue the common good, to pursue the public's good. If we were able to divest, and I think the Christian faith can make a significant contribution to this, if we were able to divest some of the energy of the political hobbyist in our politics, for instance, it would make great room for a more focused, other-centered, right-sized set of political interventions and stewardship of political responsibility that would be a great blessing to our politics.
Now, you travel around and talk about your book and your centre, and you talk about the ways that we could do things a bit differently. Do you have any examples of situations where you've witnessed and been, party to or heard of, stories that might give us a bit of encouragement in terms of what you've seen people on the ground doing that fits with the kind of message you're trying to convey?
Yeah, I do tell a story in my book about a friend of mine who has worked in politics, often on opposite sides of issues than I am, but we're good friends and we work together on human rights issues. And I got a call from her, and usually when I get a call, there's a human rights sort of issue flaring up. Can you make a phone call? Can we organize a group? And instead she says, Michael, I know this is out of the blue, but I was hoping you might spend time with my daughter. My daughter's in college. She's not going to church anymore. She doesn't see how my politics, the work I do, aligns with the values I raised her with. And, my friend said, I've tried to tell her, explain to her, and I know my friend to be living an integrated life and believing that her work is oriented towards the good. But to kids, sometimes your kids just won't buy what you're selling, right? So my friend said, Michael, I was hoping that you'd spend time with my daughter. I want her to spend time with a faithful Christian who just has a different approach to politics than her mother does. And then this is the line that got me. She said, I no longer care about the future of my daughter's politics. I just want my daughter to start going to church with her family again. Obviously, there's a certain sort of sadness there. That was also one of the more hopeful conversations I've had in a long time, because that mother was willing to give an answer to her daughter that as I travel around churches and travel around colleges and so many places around the country, my friend was willing to give her daughter an answer that so many people are waiting to hear from a loved one in their life, who is otherwise rejecting them because of political disagreement. In the case of churches, people who seem more eager to push people away from Jesus if it means defending the territory of their politics. And what has been hopeful to me is that people, I think, are coming to a dead end there. I think that kind of high emphasis and hope placed in politics, people are reaching the end of that. And that's what encourages me.
Well, it's a little like you were saying earlier, it's what's ultimate and then what's penultimate, and putting those things in their place, which seems very much in order. Well, perhaps one final question. With all of this in mind, and in an American presidential and congressional election year, how do you expect things to play out politically more generally, or specifically perhaps in terms of the politicization of faith? How do you see that going?
Simon, as you know, I fortunately and unfortunately have the experience of not just approaching these ideas from the level of theory, but having worked in politics and knowing how political machinery works. And here's what I'd say. I think we need to move from a place of talking and acting as if this is just a matter of our politics acting on us, our politics happening to us, saying things like, we just need to make it through, the next 6 months. And instead, talk about what kind of witness we are going to be with our lives and our families and our churches and our communities. I think the national sort of conversation is going to be pretty toxic. I think if enough of us took responsibility for what we were going to contribute, not only would we be blessed by that, not only would people around us and those that we touch be blessed by that, but that would filter up, and that could change the culture of our national politics. But we need to stop accepting what our politics is giving to us and sort of assuming that's the way it has to go. Well, of course, I would never talk about people in my personal life the way that I do in politics, but that's politics. This is just how the game is done. No, we actually need to say we're playing according to a different set of rules. We're living in a different reality. It's actually not politics that is at the foundation of human interaction. Actually, we could relate to one another in a different way and actually be a correction on our politics. And that's what it's going to take both over the course of the next 6 months in, again, I think a political environment which, barring intervention, is trending towards disorder, but it's what's going to be needed in the long term as well.
This has been Life and Faith with me, Simon Smart. Michael Ware's latest book is The Spirit of Our Politics, Spiritual Formation and the Renovation of Public Life. It's really interesting, and especially in this year of major elections going on around the world. Michael is the founder, president and CEO of the Centre for Christianity and Public Life. We'll put links to the centre and to Michael's book in the show notes. If you've enjoyed this episode of Life and Faith and you know someone else you think might benefit from it, please do send it on to them and bring more people into the Life and Faith orbit. Thank you, and as we do each week, we thank our producer, the always unifying Alan Douthwaite. Next week.
There are lots of people who could do a better job of defending some of the things people legitimately care about than the leader that many have chosen. Having said that, I also say this: Donald Trump is not the problem. He is a symptom of a deeper problem.